with John Dickerson starts right now.
Welcome to the Daily Report for July 18th, 2024. I'm John Dickerson. A president in physical isolation grows more politically isolated. Joe Biden, hit with COVID, receives well wishes, but also wishes that when he gets well, he drop out of the race. We'll have the latest. In Milwaukee, Donald Trump arises from the spectator stand comfy chair to the center stage spotlight. But the picture of his attacker does not get much clearer. Mountains of interviews and sleuthing amount to a whole lot of evidence of what the man was not. Also murky, the world. What's the latest on negotiations over Gaza? How are other countries evaluating Trump's pick of J.D. Vance? We'll talk to our Margaret Brennan. We'll also chart as much of the other moving pieces in the world as we can. A big drop in artificial intelligence stocks. The administration hits the student loan forgiveness button again, and new statistics on where maternal deaths are the highest. And finally, when you buy your very own full Stegosaurus skeleton for $45 million, do you put it in the garden room or the living room? The Daily Report starts in a moment. Hello, thank you for joining us. We begin our report with President Biden in isolation. The president is at his home in Delaware after testing positive for COVID-19 on Wednesday. The diagnosis has forced him off the campaign trail. He had no public events on his schedule today. A note from the president's doctor says he is, quote, still experiencing mild upper respiratory symptoms. The letter goes on to say he does not have a fever and his vital signs remain normal. While the president recovers, a CBS News poll out today shows Biden trailing former President Donald Trump by 5 points in a head-to-head matchup of likely voters. Over in Milwaukee, former President Trump is set to address delegates tonight as the Republican presidential nominee for the third election cycle in a row. It will be his first public remarks since the assassination attempt at Saturday's rally in Pennsylvania. The motive for the shooting is still unclear. The head of the Secret Service, Kim Cheadle, is facing fierce criticism from Republican lawmakers about lapses in security at the convention. Senators John Barrasso and Marsha Blackburn chased after Cheadle in the convention corridors.
You're the head of the Secret Service. You owe answers.
Cheadle will appear before the House Oversight Committee on Monday. We'll have more on all of these threads, but we begin with the latest on the Biden campaign. Senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins me now from Milwaukee. Ed, give us a rundown now on the latest pressure on President Biden to step out of the race.
Sure. Well, look, first of all, John, he was always scheduled to be in Rehoboth Beach this weekend. It's just that he had to cut short a visit to Nevada when he got that COVID-19 diagnosis. And they've been building in Delaware weekends for him lately amid the busier travel schedule so that he can sleep in one of his own beds and not be at the White House and get some rest away from the official business over at the White House. But he, as you said in your lead, he is in isolation, but he's also increasingly isolated from his party. Yet another leader or spirit animal, if you will, across the Democratic Party, Jamie Raskin from suburban Washington, D.C. today, releasing a letter that signaled similar sentiments expressed by people like Adam Schiff and apparently in private from Speaker Pelosi, former Speaker Pelosi's Leader Jeffries, Majority Leader Schumer, saying, you may not win this thing. You may drag the entire party. You got to make up your mind. The give him space and time continues, but the urgency is building, especially in the hours now ahead of this Trump speech tonight here in Milwaukee, where they signal he's trying to cast himself in a more emotional light. Someone's going to be a little more reflective in the wake of the assassination attempt. So big night for Trump, but watch the hours and days immediately following. If this speech here tonight is so well received, the president may realize we're on the verge of slipping too far behind and might make some kind of a decision. But history also suggests that this sitting president has had his back up against the wall before, and people who've doubted his abilities, and he's come through almost every time. when he was in his 20s running for the Senate, improbably, when he decided to stay in the Senate after his aneurysm in the 80s, when he ran again in 2020 and prevailed after a rough start to that primary season. Everyone within his campaign understands, and you, John, most especially can appreciate, that he's probably in the midst of what history will show is one of the roughest, if not the roughest, stretches in presidential campaign history, from that debate through to last weekend to tonight and now this COVID diagnosis. It's a bad time. The big money's drying up. The little money's coming in at a slower trickle. The polling suggests he's pulling away. But Joe Biden's been in positions like this before and has pulled it off. The question is whether his party has the patience for it again this time.
And briefly from the White House, Ed, or the campaign, are you still getting strong, persistent insistence that the president is not going to drop out? Is it coming with the same gusto as it would have been, say, 2 weeks ago?
It's coming just as firmly and quicker even than before. But just because they're sending out the spokesman to say that, of course, it's true until it isn't.
Right.
And so while they are saying that tonight, what's to say they don't get a phone call tomorrow saying, hold off, something else is coming?
Right. And then finally, Ed, do the Democrats see any openings that have come as a result of this Republican convention where they think either J.D. Vance or former President Trump, that something they've really keyed in on?
They have a lot to work with, they would argue, which is what makes this whole intra-party feud so frustrating. Republicans just nominated somebody who's quite conservative, even more so than Trump, on the issue of abortion rights, which has been a real galvanizing issue for Democrats this year. You've repeatedly heard conversation about mass deportation now, other issues that have been raised by speakers here, and also a general sense among Democrats observing that there doesn't seem to be much editorial consistency to what's going on here. There doesn't appear to be a lot of enthusiasm, just a lot of fealty to a leader who, like the sitting president, isn't necessarily that popular with Americans overall. So they feel they've got a lot to work with. And they're really frustrated by the fact that so much of this intrigue over the president's future is being driven by people within the Democratic Party. Sure. And the message from the campaign in the White House is shut up already, get in line, and let's focus on the fact that Republicans are handing us material to work with every single day of this convention that we should be able to use to compel swing voters to vote for us.
That's right. Though, as you've reported, that message is not getting them to shut up.
No.
Ed O'Keefe, we're glad you're not shutting up, and then you've got the information for us. We appreciate it, Ed. Thank you. Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio gave a quick preview Wednesday night of the approach a potential Trump-Vance administration will take when it comes to foreign policy.
We're done buying energy from countries that hate us. We're done sacrificing supply chains to unlimited global trade, and we're going to stamp more and more products with that beautiful label, Made in the USA. Together, we will make sure our allies share in the burden of securing world peace. No more free rides for nations that betray the generosity of the American taxpayer.
And joining us now for more is CBS News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent Margaret Brennan. She's also the moderator of Face the Nation, and she's in Milwaukee. Margaret, Wednesday night featured a lot of speeches about foreign policy. Trump and Vance's stances on the war in Ukraine are a departure from other congressional Republicans. How do you see that within the party?
Well, this part of the party has caused great concern among American allies. Many of the ambassadors gathered here in Milwaukee to try to tap into this inner circle of policymaking here, into the family that is really encircled the center of the party and is driving a lot of the policy, the Trump family itself, along with J.D. Vance. But it's caused great concern among the lawmakers who just really fought to get $61 billion in aid to Ukraine over the finish line, 80% of that going into U.S. investment to rebuild American stockpiles. And what's so interesting about the specifics of that, and I explained those there for you because those go into many of the districts these people represent and create jobs. So this argument of being against an aid package that would have, for example, really benefited the state of Ohio, where a lot of American tanks are manufactured, is perhaps against J.D. Vance's own self-interest, but he has this worldview that he has expressed, and it's something that caused great concern to Republican leader Mitch McConnell. When I spoke to him back in April, he did a victory lap saying that he saw his ability to get that aid package over the line. It took way too long. He apologized for it taking too long when he spoke to Ukraine's president, but he said in doing so, he had been able to defeat isolationism within his party, at least on this one issue. And he drew a direct line on that aid package and this specific conflict in Ukraine all the way back to the 1930s and 1950s. He sees that as, he sees the Ukraine war now as the extension of the conflicts back then, and this idea that you heard J.D. Vance just express there, which sounds like self-sufficiency, more as self-imposed isolation in a way that endangers the United States. There is a big conflict between that traditional conservative position in terms of American leadership in the world and this sort of populist strain you hear J.D. Vance and Donald Trump repeat.
Picking up on that populist strain, one of the things J.D. Vance says is, I don't want to spend money on Ukraine when we're not taking care of our southern border. He links it to migrant crime, which was, of course, a big topic last night at the convention. That's also migrant crime, the pressure from migrants. That's been an issue across Europe as well in the elections they've been having. It's a sort of a global issue. How do you see that?
It is, John. It's so interesting what you have seen around the world with this migrant wave that we have seen in this hemisphere. This is a hemisphere-wide crisis here throughout North and South America. You're also seeing in Europe. They've been dealing with it since 2015 because of the wars in Afghanistan and Syria. When you have large populations moving at once, it just changes the society. It changes the politics around it. It's happened country after country, France, Germany, in the United States. And the United States isn't any different. One theme that I heard last night in particular is, by the way, not referring to it just as crime, but specifically migrant crime, specifically targeting fear towards the group of people entering the country and doing it repeatedly with specific examples of women who have been victimized. We saw that weaponized in Europe to mobilize female voters, to bring them over to a conservative position, fear of being raped, fear of being murdered. Even though statistically, crimes created by migrants are at a far lower level than crime that we see just by American citizens on a day-to-day basis. So it's a tactic to really target in that you need to be fearful, and the protector, that strong man, if you put him in office, will protect you from those people.
Very briefly, Margaret, you've just got there yesterday, right? Are any sights and sounds that have captured you with fresh eyes since you've gotten there?
John, this is officially the party of Trump. I know we've said that it already was, but this is a family business now. Everything here is about Trump himself, his children, the party itself run by family members. The sign outside the door where we are gathered as the press says, they're not out to get me, they're out to get you. I'm just standing in the way. They, them. This very strong man imagery is throughout this, from the walk-on song last night, It's a Man's World, to what we hear tonight will be American Badass as the song for the walk-on. It's all about this hyper-masculine imagery that evokes a lot of countries, John, that I've covered outside the United States. It's a strong man image. It's a question, though, for the American populace. Does that work here, or does it appeal to the majority of Americans? But today, here at the RNC, it is what has overtaken what used to be the party of Reagan. It is firmly part of the Trump family business.
Margaret Brennan in Milwaukee. Thank you so much, Margaret. The search for clues about the man who attempted to assassinate Donald Trump is frustrating easy conclusions, or any conclusion at all, really. Thomas Matthew Crook's background has been devoid of many clues, and one fragment federal investigators did find they had to pull back. A report circulated he had an account on the popular gaming platform Steam and posted a message foreshadowing Saturday's shooting. The CBS News confirmed team mapped out the layout of the shooting, showing the viewpoints of the gunman and Secret Service snipers. Their analysis shows the sight line for the team closest to the shooter may have been obstructed by a tree, hindering their ability to spot him. Anna Schechter joins me now. She is CBS News Senior Coordinating Producer for Crime and Public Safety. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
What's the latest here on the investigation on the shooter?
Well, the FBI is still looking for a motive. So even after interviewing more than 200 people, reviewing 14,000 images recovered from his phone, he had 2 phones, they still do not have a motive. You mentioned earlier, feds had to pull back that information about Stream. It turned out to be a fake account. So it was not him, probably created in the aftermath of the shooting. So lots of questions, lots of mystery around what drove him to actually take that shot on Trump.
It's extraordinary in our modern day that somebody would not have a footprint at all.
It is.
Timeline was released today, or a more specific one was
Yes.
released. What does that show us?
So the timeline that we have from the Secret Service and the FBI goes through minute by minute. The big takeaway is that 20 minutes before the shooter took his shot, the Secret Service was aware that there was a suspicious man with a rangefinder on the premises outside the periphery of the Secret Service secured zone.
Anna, why would they, and this is Secret Service that's already on a heightened alert because of the chatter about an Iranian threat.
Yes.
So why would a Secret Service on high alert with a 20-minute, knowing 20 minutes ahead of time there was a rangefinder, let Trump go on stage?
Well, both local law enforcement sources and federal law enforcement sources tell CBS News, they all say that they were not aware that he had this AR-style rifle. And so the rangefinder wasn't enough to trigger an immediate, this is a red alert, code red. And so actually it was a couple minutes before he took the shot when bystanders who were around the building where he was were like, hey, he's got a gun, he's on the roof. And at that point, that's when other local law enforcement who were stationed in the traffic area were pulled back. This is just a couple minutes before he took the shot. They ran over, and one of them was hoisted up. He was grabbing onto the roof, like doing a pull-up. And then the shooter trained the gun on him. He let go, and that was the first time, once that police officer fell on the ground, he was actually injured. His ankle was injured. That was the first time that any information about a gun was put out and transmitted over the radio.
Final question is about the fortunes of Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle. She met apparently with Trump and, as we showed earlier, was chased down the hallway by 2
Yes.
Republican senators who have called for her resignation. Is that possible?
Well, she is under a tremendous amount of pressure right now to answer questions that so far she has not. The question you asked, how is it possible that Trump was allowed to walk out on stage when the Secret Service knew there was a suspicious person with a rangefinder? That really, truly is the key. Now, so far, her bosses are supporting her, but we'll see in the coming days what happens.
Anna Schechter, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Still to come, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will address a joint session of Congress next week as he faces growing pressure from the Israeli government to reach a ceasefire hostage deal with Hamas. Our Deborah Pata has our report from East Jerusalem. Plus, a Stegosaurus skeleton was already making history for its size and fullness, but it will now be remembered for something else, its record-setting price tag. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Coming up, our series. Wait a minute. Tom, is that you working the camera?
Keep leaning out of your close-up.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I use sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm
choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good. Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
That desired farm, it's a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
White House National Security spokesperson John Kirby says President Biden is still expected to meet with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu next week to discuss the ongoing war with Hamas. It's unclear how the president's COVID diagnosis will affect those plans. CBS News foreign correspondent Deborah Pata is in East Jerusalem with the latest for us on where ceasefire talks stand. Deborah?
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is facing huge pressure at home to make a deal for the release of the more than 100 hostages still being held in Gaza. He has repeatedly blamed the deadlocked ceasefire negotiations on Hamas, accusing them of clinging to demands that endanger Israel's security. He was jeered in the Israeli parliament by opposition politicians for his failure to clinch a hostage deal. It comes ahead of a planned visit to the United States next week, where Netanyahu will address Congress. His critics say it is a waste of time unless he announces an agreement that will see the freedom of those hostages. But today, Netanyahu visited soldiers in Rafah, where he was given a tour of Israel's Defense Force operations and insisted once again that it is military pressure, John, that will ensure a hostage deal.
Deborah Pata in East Jerusalem, thank you. Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich was back in a Russian court today for the second hearing in his espionage trial. The court says Gershkovich will give his final statement tomorrow after both sides give their closing arguments. No media, family, or diplomats has been allowed in during the closed-door trial. Gershkovich was arrested in March 2023 for allegedly gathering info for the United States. The first American arrested on such charges in Russia since the Cold War. Both the Wall Street Journal and the U.S. government say the charges are bogus and have called the trial a sham. He's facing up to 20 years in prison. President Biden announced another round of student loan debt relief today. The administration is forgiving $1.2 billion in debt for 35,000 borrowers. Eligible recipients are those who work in public service. In total, the administration says it has waived over $168 billion in debt for roughly 4.8 million Americans, about 1 in 10 student loan borrowers. Meanwhile, a federal appeals court has blocked the Biden administration's SAVE plan from being implemented. The policy was introduced last summer after the Supreme Court blocked Biden's more sweeping student loan forgiveness plan that would have canceled up to $20,000 for 43 million people. The SAVE plan would have lowered monthly payments and cut the repayment timeline for millions of people. The Education Department says it's reviewing the decision. Wall Street semiconductor stocks lost nearly $500 billion in market value Wednesday. It was the worst day since 2020, and the drop stems over fears of escalating trade tensions with China. The tech-heavy NASDAQ failed to make a comeback following its worst day since 2022. That's because a Bloomberg report indicates that the Biden administration is considering putting harsher restrictions on companies exporting their critical chip-making equipment to China. The rule would also allow the U.S. to impose controls on foreign-made products that use even a very small amount of American technology. Those fears were exacerbated by Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump, who says the U.S. would not defend Taiwan in the event of a Chinese invasion and insisted Taipei should pay Washington for its defense. Those comments to Bloomberg added to the sell-off in the market. According to TrendForce, Taiwan is expected to account for 66% of production of the world's most advanced chips this year. Analysts have warned that any conflict over the island could shatter the global economy. But the sell-off on Thursday appeared broader than tech alone. The Dow Jones declined more than 500 points. The S&P 500 also dropped over 40 points. A near-complete Stegosaurus skeleton sold for $44.6 million at auction, marking the most ever paid for a fossil at auction.
We can open Stegosaurus at $3 million, at $3 million now, at $3,200,000, at $3,200,000, ahead of you online, at $3,200,000, at $3,500,000.
Buyer was hedge fund billionaire Ken Griffin. And as you just heard, Wednesday's bidding began at $3 million, and it was expected to cap off around $6 million. Nicknamed Apex, the 150-million-year-old skeleton is 70% complete. At 11 feet tall, it is the fullest fossilized Stegosaurus ever found. Researchers say the skeleton lacks signs of combat injuries, but does show evidence of arthritis, indicating that Apex died of old age. Sources close to Griffin say he is looking into loaning the fossil to a U.S. institution. Still to come, the Summer Olympics in Paris is just over a week away, but the city is still scrambling to complete preparations. We'll hear from CBS's Elaine Cobb on the latest. You're streaming The Daily Report.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gailey has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate.
Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am.
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing and bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else. This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
Or you can be really old at 60
and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to the Daily Report. I'm John Dickerson. Here are some additions to our top stories. The moments leading up to the attempted assassination of former President Trump are facing heavy scrutiny. Sources say Pennsylvania State Police notified Secret Service about a suspicious person with a rangefinder about 20 minutes before the gunman opened fire. We also now know Trump received a private in-person briefing about the incident with the Secret Service director on Tuesday. The number of migrants illegally crossing into the southern border has dropped dramatically, nearing the threshold that would require officials to lift the Biden administration's partial ban on asylum claims. In the past week, the average daily number of illegal crossings fell to less than 1,700. Illegal crossings reached a high in December 2023 at nearly 8,000 per day. The NTSB issued a safety alert today, urging parents to protect teen drivers from driving while under the influence of marijuana. The alert comes alongside the final report on a deadly 2022 crash that left 6 teenagers dead. Investigators concluded the 16-year-old driver was likely impaired by recent marijuana use. With President Biden off the campaign trail, and he's relying on his vice president to counter the Republican National Convention. Kamala Harris spoke this morning criticizing the Republican National Committee's messaging, and her newly nominated opponent, Senator J.D. Vance, who gave his first major speech Wednesday night after being announced as Trump's running mate.
Joe Biden has been a politician in Washington for longer than I've been alive, 39 years old. Kamala Harris is not much further behind. For half a century, he's been the champion of every major policy initiative to make America weaker and poorer.
You cannot claim you stand for unity if you are pushing an agenda that deprives whole groups of Americans of basic freedoms, opportunity, and dignity.
CBS News Chief Washington Correspondent Major Garrett joins me now from Milwaukee. Major, it's good to see you. What did J.D. Vance's speech tell you or us last night about the future trajectory of the Trump campaign, either geographically or substantively?
Great to be with you, John. I hope the audience at home will enjoy the musical playings of Six Wire, the RNC band here doing a lot of dad rock, classic rock, old guy radio, whatever you call it. I will compete happily with Six Wire. So I think one of the takeaways from last night's speech from J.D. Vance, and this is slightly glib, but I think it's within the bounds. Millennials for mercantilism, okay? What is mercantilism? It was an economic philosophy started in the 16th century, went all the way to the 19th century, early 20th century America that is basically an idea of economic nationalism built on supporting native industries and repelling or at least raising the prices of any kind of import that comes from another country with very high tariffs. Now, the Trump campaign says they want reciprocal trade. But reciprocal trade means meeting in some agreement about whatever the level of tariffs are. That's not what is on the agenda for a second Trump term, should there be one. Former President Trump has said tariffs across the board on all trading partners, up to 10%, maybe even getting rid of or dramatically reducing income taxes and replacing that revenue almost entirely with tariffs. That's mercantilism. And essentially that's what J.D. Vance was talking about last night. Deeply critical of existing trade deals, all trade deals basically carried out before former President Trump became president of the United States. That is now part of, I think it's fair to say, with J.D. Vance giving that speech last night and becoming the chosen running mate for former President Trump, a new part of the governing Republican economic philosophy. It is a dramatic change from free market, Milton Friedman, Francis Hayek, and other free market people that wrote and talked about the fundamentals of global economics and that Republicans embraced for the better part of the last 4 decades.
And just quickly to follow up on that, Major, and the usual criticism of mercantilism is that it ends up raising domestic prices because you're not benefiting from the free market's ability to go all over the world and get the cheapest goods or cheapest parts of a good to make it for cheap in the United States.
Right, and the Trump campaign would say, yeah, but that created a race to the bottom, and that very dramatically affected the economic fortunes of the middle part of America, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and the like, because those industries could not compete. They need, if not walls built around them economically, some kind of tariff protection. Maybe that's true, maybe it isn't. The fact that it was a centerpiece of this millennial addition to the Trump campaign ticket, I think, is worth noting.
Fascinating. Yeah, absolutely. So conventions, and you've already answered this question, but I'll ask it for anything else. Conventions are essentially like Cinderella. There's a big party, but at midnight, the clock strikes and everything turns back into a pumpkin. The race goes back to wherever it was. Some things linger on sometimes. What, in this case, even though this convention takes place in a unique moment, what do you think lingers on beyond all of the theatrics, which are good for the party, but probably won't affect the election?
So conventions try to create moments. This convention, John, did not have to create a moment where imagery and emotion combined. That happened Saturday in Butler, Pennsylvania, and it happened most visibly here on Monday when former President Trump, keeping the Republican National Convention fully on schedule, arrived here, white patch over his right ear, and the thunderous, deeply emotional reaction to that. And what you're going to hear later tonight in the prelude to former President Trump's speech is rock and roll screaming to the rafters here. Fight, 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 with fists raised in the air. Merging that emotion and that imagery of former President Trump getting back on his feet. That will be, I believe, the iconic message that comes out of this convention, merging with what was already an iconic photograph.
And quickly, since you got sources everywhere, what are you hearing about the Biden situation?
It's distressed, it is isolated, and it is facing a very uncertain future. That future, I'm told by many Democrats, likely to be resolved one way or the other by Monday, no later than Tuesday of next week.
Major Garrett from Milwaukee, and people wonder why we all wear those headsets. It's because of 6-Wire and the other madness going on behind you. Thanks for being there for us, Major. We appreciate it. In May, we reported that for the first time ever, daily marijuana use in the United States outpaced daily drinking. Well, now that shift is starting to catch up with business. Pernod Ricard, one of the world's biggest alcohol makers, is leaving the wine industry. A company which produces popular liquor brands like Absolut Vodka and Jameson Whiskey says it made the decision to drop its vino division because it's been quote, underperforming for a while now. And there's a reason why. According to the International Organization of Vine and Wine, global consumption of wine has dropped to a 27-year low. In other booze-related news, Bud Light is falling further behind the competition for best-selling beer in the United States. It's now in third place, behind Modelo Especial and Michelob Ultra, which is brewed by the same company as Bud Light. Bud Light's popularity has fallen in the past year, largely thanks to a boycott of the brand that started when the company paid transgender influencer Dylan Mulvaney to make a sponsored post with the drink. Athletes from around the world are arriving in Paris ahead of the Summer Olympics next week. CBS News' Elaine Cobb has the latest.
Paris is pulling out all the stops as it scrambles to get everything ready for the opening ceremony. Seating has been put in place along the quays of the River Seine and on several of the central bridges. Final rehearsals for all the boats take place next week. Central Paris has been cut in two as people now need a QR code to cross the river or access some event sites even on foot. All but 4 of the city's bridges have been closed by traffic. City Hall and the Olympic Committee are confident all is on track. The first athletes arrived today to take up residence in the brand new Olympic Village. The American team reportedly chose accommodation closest to the exit and the restaurant. Parisians have been complaining about the disruption ahead of the Games. Many have already fled Paris, but as it all comes together, there is more of a buzz in the air. Not everyone is happy, though. Some dancers hired for the opening ceremony have threatened to go on strike after they compared notes on contracts and discovered pay disparities and no rebroadcast royalties. In fact, France's main union has already served strike notice for every day until the end of September, just in case. John?
Elaine Cobb in Paris, thank you. Still to come, a new report links abortion restrictions to higher rates of maternal deaths. We'll speak to a medical expert about why. You're streaming the Daily Report.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides is your place for fact-based, unbiased reporting.
At the White House, at the Capitol, on the campaign trail.
What do you say to those in your party?
Any cracks in the Republican Party?
Our reporters and our anchors travel the country talking to voters like you
about the issues that matter most.
Immigration is really a factor right now
that are going to be driving your decisions.
What would you say to those who say, look, that's just democracy at work?
Listening to you and bringing your voice into our coverage.
I want a strong, proud America.
Is democracy on the ballot in 2024?
Let us help you decide.
America Decides on CBS News 24/7.
Stream our expanded one-hour program Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7. That is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable.
The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
President Biden's COVID-19 diagnosis highlights a recent rise in Americans testing positive for the virus. As of July 6th, the CDC says there had been an 11% increase in test positivity from the week prior. There's also been a 1.3% increase in emergency room visits. The agency says a majority of these cases come from the KP3 variant, though cases aren't more severe in this case than other strains. The CDC has also been tracking which states have the highest levels of COVID-19 in the wastewater. As you can see, the majority of the areas with amounts deemed to be very high are in the South and the Western United States, with the exception of Maryland. New research finds that states with strict abortion restrictions are seeing higher rates of maternal deaths. The Commonwealth Fund analyzed data from 2021 through 2022 following the overturning of Roe v. Wade and the subsequent enactment of state abortion laws. It found that the most maternal deaths occurred in the Mississippi Delta, where a large percentage of counties do not have access to reproductive care. Dr. Carolyn Suffren joins us from Washington now. She's an associate professor of gynecology and obstetrics, at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. Thank you so much for joining us. How are abortion restrictions linked to this increase in maternal deaths?
Well, the states that have banned abortion in all or nearly all circumstances are also the same states that have the fewest maternity care providers. So if you think about that, if you're a pregnant person and you live in what we call a maternity care desert, where there's no obstetric provider or maternity care hospital, if you live in a maternity care desert in Mississippi and you need prenatal care or other resources, or if you have a pregnancy complication like high blood pressure, or if you go into labor and are having your baby, you have nowhere to go that is in your community. And so what we find in these states that have maternity care deserts is that they are also the states banning abortion. The correlation here is that these are states that do not care about the well-being of pregnant patients, parenting people, and their families. But on top of that, abortion bans themselves can prevent people from obtaining life-saving necessary medical care. And we've seen in some states, including Texas, which banned abortion even in many circumstances, even before the Dobbs decision, we have seen an increase in maternal morbidity and mortality from pregnancy complications that could otherwise have been safely managed with abortion. And what's also important to highlight about this correlation between abortion bans existing in the same states as maternity care deserts is that it does not affect all people equally. We see profound inequities in impacting Black women and Indigenous women having higher rates of death in pregnancy and also having more difficulties accessing the abortion care that they need.
If the goal is to have more mothers carry babies to term by getting rid of access to abortion services, wouldn't it stand to reason that you would have more mothers in the world who would require maternal care, and therefore this was a foreseeable challenge to existing resources?
That's right, John. This was absolutely foreseeable and was already existing even before the Dobbs decision paved the way for even more abortion restrictions. And it shows a lack of internal consistency, right? If you really are concerned about the well-being of pregnant individuals and babies they may give birth to, then you should be investing in them having healthy pregnancies. But you also need to be investing in their families and their communities once they have given birth. And these are also communities where we see a lack of appropriate resources, lacking affordable housing, access to a wide range of healthcare, adequate nutrition, many, many other factors that would otherwise support healthy, thriving families.
So, Doctor, what is the, let me ask you for two kinds of solutions. What is the larger healthcare system solution that might be possible? And then what should individual patients, pregnant mothers, do if they find themselves in one of these deserts?
Well, I'll start with the individual patient one. If they find themselves in one of these deserts, the answer seems obvious. Get yourself to a place where there is healthcare. However, that is not equally feasible for everybody. And the ability for people to travel either for a delivery or for a needed abortion is very limited for many people, especially those that are already living in these communities that have been disinvested. In terms of the bigger picture, we need to reverse the abortion bans and recognize that abortion is healthcare and is a part of comprehensive pregnancy care. We need to ensure that states fully expand Medicaid to cover not only during pregnancy, but also up to 12 months postpartum and beyond. People live after they are pregnant. They are still people in this world who need healthcare coverage. And we need to invest in other resources in their communities to ensure that they can have healthy, thriving lives, adequate nutrition, education, housing, all of the things that can support healthy families.
Dr. Carolyn Suffren, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Senator J.D. Vance accepted the vice presidential nomination without pushback. Coming up, we'll take a look at the moments when choosing a running mate wasn't quite so easy. You're streaming the Daily Report.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy. And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more. Experience thought-provoking.
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
Innovative and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
For 1 hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Don't miss true crime anytime you want, anywhere you go. With the 48 Hours podcast. Real crimes, real lives, real justice.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Listen to 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
But with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Haitians are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's gonna be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm gonna remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was gonna be born, he was only gonna live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift, stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
A CBS News investigation. People looking for love, finding their life savings gone.
This could happen to anybody.
And sometimes losing their lives. Anything for love. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Comedy icon Bob Newhart has died. Newhart's career in show business started in 1960 when his album, The Button-Down Mind of Bob Newhart, rose to #1 on the Billboard charts. It was the first time that a comedy album ever hit the top spot. Newhart made the jump to television stardom, playing Dr. Bob Hartley on The Bob Newhart Show from 1972 to 1978. He was also known to younger audiences as Papa Elf in the 2003 Christmas classic, Elf. Newhart's publicist says he died at his home in Los Angeles on Thursday after a short series of illnesses. He was 94.
I stand here humbled, and I'm overwhelmed with gratitude to say I officially accept your nomination to be Vice President of the United States of America.
Ohio Senator J.D. Vance formally accepted the Republican nomination for vice president last night, 2 days after former President Donald Trump chose him. It was smooth and highly choreographed, but this has not always been the case historically. In 1976, incumbent President Gerald Ford faced former California Governor Ronald Reagan. In an attempt to make himself more palatable to delegates worried that he was too conservative, Reagan chose the moderate Senator Richard Schweiker of Pennsylvania before the official roll call. Reagan also tried to force a rule change to make Ford select his running mate, as CBS correspondent Barry Serafin explains.
Reagan has been arguing to delegations that since he has named his potential running mate, Senator Schweiker, in advance, the delegates have a right to know who Mr. Ford would choose. The Reagan people think that this is a test of strength, that a win on this issue would indicate a Reagan strength within this convention, and they think that anyone Mr. Ford might have to name in advance would be liable to offend someone and would cost him some delegate support somewhere within this convention.
But Reagan's gambit angered his conservative allies who opposed Schweiker. CBS News' Dan Rather spoke on the RNC floor, with an upset Nebraska Senator Carl Curtis, who points out the move would also prevent Reagan from being Ford's potential running mate.
This is a scheme to lock Schweiker in for vice president. Reagan has his package. If the convention would vote to force Ford to have a package, they'd vote between the two packages, and Schweiker would be home free. Schweiker can't be nominated on the floor of this convention in a straight-out fight. Now, if this new rule is adopted, it locks Schweiker in if Reagan wins. If Ford wins, it locks Reagan out. It's foolish.
Reagan lost the nomination to Ford that year, and Ford went on to ultimately lose the White House contest to Jimmy Carter. Reagan returned 4 years later as the party's nominee, and for a brief moment, it seemed Gerald Ford, yes, the previous president, could serve as Reagan's running mate. But as Leslie Stahl reported on the floor of the convention, a potential agreement between the two men fell through, and then suddenly the tides turned to favor George Herbert Walker Bush.
Walter, a top lieutenant just came and said, it's not Ford. They're coming all around me to tell me it's not Ford. Someone told me it was Bush. They said it's absolutely definite. Go with it. They're all yelling Bush all around me. Everybody's yelling Bush, Walter.
Okay, Leslie, we'll wait developments. Well, who's writing the script for this one? That's what I want to know.
There was none of that drama this year, though, even though it was a last-minute announcement. The convention floor embraced Vance as Trump's choice to join him on the ticket. Up next, it's a special edition of America Decides from the RNC in Milwaukee. For all of us here at the Daily Report, thank you for spending the hour with us.
Okay, so let's just start at the beginning.
Well, let me start with this. What is at stake here?
What is the answer then?
Do you know why? You want me to just keep going?
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Were there death threats?
How is this possible?
What's wrong with that argument?
Are you saying they lied?
Have you told the government that?
Why won't you say the word crisis?
You're not answering my question.
This really
is that scary?
Does that make sense?
What do you mean? What does